This week on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts, how might some of these executive orders affect us financially in our personal situations and moving forward? Let's get into it this week here on the podcast with Phil. Let's go. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist, Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Phil and I as we talk investing, finance, retirement. And Phil, as we said, a week or two ago when we did our prior show, we were going to see what happens in the first couple of days. And it's only been a couple of days.
So
President Trump's been in office, but we've got fast and furious executive orders. And there's lots of stuff that we could talk about. Lord knows the news cycles are just going to town. But I just, like usual, you and I are going to just try to focus on some of the financial pieces.
Right. Yep.
And just kind of banter a little bit on what they might mean for, moving forward. Because like you've seen some crazy stuff out there already. People obviously on the opposite side who want to be contrarian, they're like, oh, it's been, 12 hours and the price of eggs hasn't come down. And it's like, okay, can we be realistic? Exactly. I mean, I don't care if you like the person, dislike the person, that's just not even realistic, right? No matter what's going on, things are going to take time. So I thought we would talk about a few of the stuff that's been signed so far, just to see what, we think, might, translate down the way. You doing all right this week?
Besides doing good. Yeah. Besides it, we are in the deep freeze. I tell you, it was minus 6 degrees last night. And I think today we're supposed to get up to maybe +5. So
the time we're taping this, the whole Gulf Coast, we were just talking about it, has snow, which it never gets. I've got snow, which we rarely get. So
it's a crazy storm that's blowing through, but this too will pass, right? It never stays around long. So.
Right. And and if you're not happy with the new administration, well, things will
It will
pass, right?
Not quite as quick as the weather, but
right. But I think there's some, there's going to be some things I think we're going to see improve all around, but it's going to take time. Yeah. So let's get into it. Let's start with the one that most people are obviously concerned about right away, which is just the cost of living and inflation, how it's affecting them because, the price of everything is up, right? And it has been up. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so he's got several pieces in several of the executive orders address this, cost of living and the inflation side of it. And again, understanding what they can do as an executive branch. It's not like they can go in and all of a sudden cause prices to drop.
No, you can't force anything, right? Yeah, you can't just say, you all will make eggs, 99 cents. Doesn't work that way. Exactly.
So what the goal is make the economic environment such that this can happen, through reducing regulatory cost, and the regulations imposed on the various industries. I mean, that's probably the biggest piece of the inflation side of it and cost of living is helping easing the regulation side of the equation, so that hopefully businesses will take that and ultimately reduce prices. Now, I mean, at the end of the day, that then is the business's choice. So True. We'll see what businesses do with that, as this takes place. And like we were talking offline before the podcast, I mean, all of this isn't going to happen overnight. I mean, it's going to take time.
6 months to a year before we see any sizable or noticeable.
I would say, at a minimum. I mean, they've got to make some major changes for things to happen. But to me, this gives you at least insight into the direction that the administration's hoping for, So
Right.
And a big piece of the inflation and cost there also is energy. And that was
that was going to say that was where I was going to go.
A portion of his executive orders related to energy. So I mean, he declared a national emergency around energy. So making it so that we can expand, the domestic energy production, by opening up federal lands, for drilling, encouraging and making that process for applying for permits a whole lot easier. So there's a lot of, things that are, again, hoping to be put in place that he's kind of, through the executive orders, directed his various departments. And with all of these, first to do a study, but the goal is to help reduce the cost of energy
and that's going to be the big one.
Yeah, by making it more friendly from a regulatory standpoint in the U.S. and by then opening up, some of these lands that have been closed where prior to the last 4 years, we were able to do some of the, the drilling.
Well, Yeah, and let's we were energy independent under his first administration.
Correct.
We reversed all that under Biden's, and so obviously they want to get back to that.
Right.
And if you kind of go back to cost of living and inflation, this is the part that's really going to probably move the needle more than anything.
Yes.
And that is going to take time, because once we get a bit more energy independent, the cost of transportation basically across the country, trucking stuff, shipping stuff, so on and so forth, that should hopefully ease a lot of those things. But that takes time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that is the reality with, the energy side of it, is it affects everything. I mean, it affects you and I personally as we go to the pump and fill up, or, pay our heat bills.
Yep.
But
which are high because it's so damn cold.
Which are high because it's so cold right now.
Right.
But beyond that, I mean, it affects everything, because all businesses are incurring, or consuming energy at some level, and those costs are just getting passed on. So at the end of the day, businesses make whatever profit they make.
And we'll touch on business here in just a second, but we'll just kind of run through a few more. Obviously, the trade and tariffs piece is a big part of it. If we're talking from an economic standpoint, the proposed 25% tariffs to Canada and Mexico starting in February. So just starting here in a week or so.
Starting around the corner, but
and they're all going to do their posturing back and forth about stuff, and this is where I think the negotiation process has to come into play. Like, you got to come out swinging a little bit, and then we'll see how they dial things in and they agree to whatever. But the big one that I think is interesting is the 60% tariff on Chinese goods.
Yes.
And you're going to have a lot of people go back and forth on that, but the idea again being that, you and I talked about this a couple of weeks back, or maybe even a month or so back, and it was like, we got to start asking ourselves, do we need these items? Are we getting upset about something that may go up 60% if it's something we don't even really need? The idea is to force people to, get things under control by what you buy, right? Use your dollars where it matters.
Right. Well, it comes back to America first is kind of the overlying, I would say, theme of what's going on across all these, and with the tariffs too, because the reality is we become way too dependent on these other countries.
Oh, for sure. For everything,
and the trade deals aren't fair. I mean, we're consuming way more of their goods than they're consuming of ours. So, I mean, they're benefiting way more than the U.S. So the goal of this is to help bring things more in balance,
It's like your portfolio.
But exactly. I mean, you got to have a good balance. But at the end of the day, as you do that, it could be painful. I mean, it's not sure. We talked about that. Even if some of these tariffs do come in play, and it gets beyond the posturing and they do end up, introducing some of these tariffs. Yeah, I mean, again, companies, they make what they make. So if they're going to have to incur tariffs on goods that they're buying from China, Canada, whoever it happens to be, they're going to pass that along because they're not going to absorb that cost. But at some point, that's going to then encourage either them or competitors in the U.S. to start producing those products. So I mean, that in the long run can help, actually expand and grow our economy, because instead of just looking at, well, the cheapest thing was to buy these overseas, which it has been for years. And I mean, that's just accelerated more and more each year because they can do it so much cheaper. Well, now this tariff, it's going to help balance it out where it's not going to be that much cheaper, maybe way more expensive now because of the tariff.
Yeah.
So let's see how we can do this in the U.S. to help bolster our economy and then make us more dependent on our own society, the U.S. itself, so that if we get into some kind of a war, if we get into like a COVID scenario again, we don't have these worries and shutdowns and we're running out of everything because we can't get cargo shipped here. So
Right. Yeah, I was talking with somebody and they were like, so my iPhone's going to cost more because of this. And I was like, okay, but didn't you just get one last year?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, yeah. And I was like, so why do you need another one? Like, I mean, are you breaking them that often? So again, kind of bringing it back to, what do you need and why do you need it? It's just like anything, when we're talking about finance, no matter what walk of life you're in, if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, there's times when we just need to, at life, when we just go, do I really even need that? Right. So, and this, hopefully, maybe this will shine, trying to find a silver lining here to some of this stuff for people who are getting a bit out of shape. But anyway, so let's talk more about the business impact, right? So obviously some of the business stuff is, the 15% minimum corporate tax proposal. That's a big deal. I mean, that hopefully will spawn some of that company growth.
Right. Yeah. So the tariffs, I mean, we talked about that. I mean, that could, potentially cause some negative effects on the businesses, which ultimately will pass through. One of the energy side of the equation was he's eliminated the electric vehicle mandate.
Right.
Which,
so you can still buy them. You can still get one. Right. He's just the idea that all vehicles had to be switched by a certain time was also, it didn't even make any sense, from the prior administration because the infrastructure is not there.
It's not there to handle it. And I mean, I've had that discussion so many times with clients and others that we're so far from that. From an infrastructure standpoint, which again is something that in part of his energy side of the equation is encouraging the development of our infrastructure. But that being said, so the electric vehicle mandate being lifted, the downside economically for businesses, though, is that there's many, many businesses that have invested heavily in going electric that they're going to have to now reevaluate and maybe abandon or at least severely downsize that footprint or what they were anticipating doing with electric vehicles. So, I mean, they already spent significant amounts of money kind of retooling and trying to meet this mandate that was coming. And as they're starting to move down that path, now they're going to have to backpedal, so we'll see. I mean, that especially in our area, can have a negative effect on businesses but we've already seen that, as they start to transition back, because we've seen probably over the last year, that demand for electric vehicles they're just not there. So in the Metro Detroit area, there's all sorts of surplus of vehicles. In fact, it's interesting. A lot of these manufacturers, for their executive programs, they get executive leases even in retirement. I mean, depending on the level, they might get one or two executive leases where it's not free, but they get them at a discounted rate. Well, some of my clients that are in that scenario, they are now mandating to them that one or two of them have to be electric. So that's how they're helping, I guess, get rid of some of this surplus, is that, well, we've got a captive audience, right? I mean, this is our executives and retirees. So let's force them into taking some of these vehicles out of the inventory.
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of The Tax Smart Retiree right now.
Yeah. And so obviously there's a lot of hullabaloo about, how we're going to pay for some of these things. Well, he pulled out of the Paris Accords. He pulled out of the WHO. We'll see what happens with that. But there's a lot. I mean, we overpay, and this is to his point. This was his point the first time around. We do overpay. I mean, I'm looking on Reuters right now, and we pay 22% of the overall WHO's budget, right? By far and away, about 7% more than 8% more than the next country.
Next country.
And from there, it's way down to like 7% by the next country, right? So we are the biggest backer of these organizations. We put most of the money in there. And if we're being non-efficient, whether for any reason, we have to start figuring out how to cut costs, right? If you bring this down to just regular lay terms, Phil, if you're running your house the way the federal government under any administration has been running for the last number of years, you're going to be underwater, right? So at some point, at some point, you either got to take on another job, right, as a homeowner, or you got to start cutting your expenses. And we're having to cut expenses. We have to do that, right? And you can disagree about which expenses get cut all day long, but we do have to do this with a $35 trillion debt.
Right. And I mean, that's the big goal of the Governmental Efficiency Agency now, is to do that, right? Is to look at all these different programs, the people that are out there. And he's put a hiring freeze on all federal, executive federal employees. There's no hiring allowed until they come back with a plan. And part of which is working with the Department of Governmental Efficiency. He's put in place, and I thought this was interesting, an order that all workers have to return to the office, so the remote work is done.
Yeah, and I get the interesting split on that, right? Where it's like people are like, hey, that's going to cost more money. Because we got to go buy fuel and so on and so forth. But we also have, structures everywhere that are just sitting there being heated and cooled and so on and so forth with no one in them. So we've got to find a better balance.
Yeah, and I mean it's one of those things. Even companies are doing that to some extent. They're looking at it for that reason to say, hey, we're paying for the facility.
Yeah,
we can't get out of it, so we've got to use it. But beyond that, I think there's just, and it doesn't apply to everyone, right? Everyone's different, but it's a different environment when you're working together with people in an office than if you're working by yourself at home.
For sure.
And I would say probably the majority of people, they're going to be more efficient from the business standpoint if they're working in an office environment.
Very true.
The distractions aren't there. So anyways, let's
talk a little bit about the market and some of the stuff that's happened, just in recent, right? So, obviously look at the time we're taping this, the Dow is up 44,000, a little over 44,000. The S&P is up over 6,000 a little bit. And, it's been doing well. I mean, it's rocky, but that's to be anticipated.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the long term with this, bottom line, I wouldn't make any investment decisions based on what's going on. One of the biggest concerns I have is, people are thinking, the energy side of the equation is very heavily pushing towards that, drill, baby, drill. So,
right. So let me get in some energy.
Yeah. Put everything into energy. Be careful. Right. I mean, because, he's trying to set up the infrastructure, the environment for that energy side of the business to be more favorable, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Right. It's going to take some time.
It's going to take some time. And I thought it was interesting. Just trying to find it. I think it was the head of Exxon. Yeah. ExxonMobil's CEO was indicating that, the bottom line, the economy drives demand, right? It's not who's in the office. The political shifts aren't going to make a big difference. I mean, it helps.
Sure. Well, Phil, if you think about something cyclically, right? If you're forcing a lot of people to go back to work, you're kind of ending the easy thing of working from home. Even just the government employees, you're out on the road more. It's going to cost more to get gas, right? So you're going to have to buy gas, which is going to drive business, which hopefully, kind of, again, circle of life. It kind of feeds into this idea that, okay, now they got to start creating. Now we got to drill. Now we got to pump it out. Now we got to get the refineries going. And that should start to bring stuff down.
Right. Yeah. So just long term, I think a lot of what's being put in place will benefit us from an investment, from an economic.
Long term being the key.
Right. An economic standpoint, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's not, maybe not even going to happen or to a large effect in 6 months.
Probably not.
At the end of the day, the economy is going to do what it's going to do. Any of these changes are going to take time to affect what's going on in the economy, because it took us how many years to get to where we're at today. And some of that you just don't change. That's cyclical. That's what the economies do. We go through these ebbs and flows. That's part of what the markets do, what economies do. So you can't change that ebb and flow. You might be able to help it. If we're heading into a downturn, if we've lessened the regulations, made it more friendly to operate, maybe that downturn isn't as steep or as long, right? But if we're heading into a recessionary time, not saying we are, there's not a lot you're going to do to stop it, right? You can't change. It's like trying to change the waves in the ocean. You're not going to change them. You can maybe help hedge a little bit and do certain things, but at the end of the day, they're going to do what they're going to do. The economy is going to do the same thing. We can't grow forever. It's just not how things work.
Well, speaking of the speaking of the market in that little bit, I was having a conversation earlier today with somebody, and they were like, oh, it's the S&P's done so well the last 2 years.
Yep.
And it just kind of, it's like, does anybody ever kind of do this for their own education? So looking at the S&P right now, Phil, at the time we're taping this, and we'll wrap it up, it's up 0.7% for today, right? So, 0.7, not a big deal, right? For at the time we're taping this, one day, right? 5-day period. It's up 3%. Okay, that's not bad, right? Over 1 month, it's 2%, right? And you keep going out, right? Over 6 months, it's up 9%, right? That's pretty good.
Yeah, so now you're noticing the later part of the year, which it had a big boost right at the end.
Right.
Yeah.
So over a full year, not the calendar year of this year, 25, but a full year, it's up 25%. Well, that's pretty darn good. Over 5 years, I want to take a guess at what it is over 5 years?
Over 5 years, you're probably
It might surprise you. 85.
Okay, 85%, yeah.
Over 5 years. So I get why people will look and go, whatever decisions are being made, keep this going, right? Because this is awesome. Over 5 years, I'm up 80%. But we got to be realistic. You and I talked about that. That cannot go on forever.
Right.
How do you make an omelet? You got to break some eggs, right? And at some point, a lot of changes to our system is going to cause, probably some blips.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing, I'm sure if you look into that, so yeah, we're up for the S&P 85%, but what portion of that came from the Magnificent Seven, right? The top
probably 60% of that, 50%.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, it's been heavily driven by technology. Tech. AI is, with tech, it's part of that, has taken that over in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about that the last time. I think you're going to see that continue to some extent. AI has improved and it gets better all the time. But just like electric vehicles, I think companies have made a big bet towards AI, hoping that it's going to pay off. So now we're starting to get into that more adoption phase of that to see, okay, well, we've invested heavily towards this. What's it going to do? And if it continues to improve, I think you're going to see, the markets continue to go up, but I don't think you're going to see the increases like we've seen.
Yeah, to your point about AI, Phil, I think earlier today, about 3 hours ago, it says he announced an AI project about $500 billion with some Sam Altman and some other big guys. Actually, Elon doesn't seem to be a fan of this. But either way, a lot of changes. We need to make sure that we are. I think we need to pump the brakes just because if you're excited because of the changes coming, or if you're depressed because of the changes coming, either way, it's probably not a smart move to take any action right now, right? Would that be
the name of the game is investing. Investing doesn't involve betting on future actions, right? That's gambling. So betting,
and being emotional,
where this economy is going, which direction we're heading. Yeah, does that mean you shouldn't have some in that? No, absolutely. Maybe a little shift in the portfolio towards energy because long term it probably will be beneficial. That's great, but it doesn't.
A little though, I like that. A little.
Everything's going into energy because that's where we're heading. Well, you're betting it all, right? It'd be the same thing if you bet it all on AI in the past, which you would have won. But
or crypto or whatever.
You could have lost too heavily. And that's not the name of the game, right?
If you're 30, that's different than if you're 60. So
right. And even if you're 60, if this is a small little portfolio that you could lose all of it and it's not going to change retirement, go for it. If that's what your conviction is and you want the fun of and the thrill of that, then go for it.
And I think that's a message that we've been pretty consistent about. It's like, make sure you're doing something, responsible and reasonable with your situation. We all want to try to swing for the fences with some things once in a while, but just make sure you're not betting the farm. And of course, as always, if you got questions, need some help, that's why you talk to a pro. It's like, hey, get me a good structure, get me a good plan, and then carve me out a little bit of fun money or a little bit of, whatever that we can swing for the fences on, And I think, if you're working with an advisor who understands you, they're going to work with you on that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. We won't be able to spend any more time on it. We'll get out of here. We'll get back into some more stuff next week here on the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Phil and I on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Click the links below to get in touch with Phil, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks, Phil.
Take care.
Phil? Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.